Welcome to Canadian Express, your go-to source for insightful analysis on the issues shaping our nation. Today, we're delving into a constitutional firestorm ignited in the Canadian Senate. A debate so profound it could redefine the very fabric of our confederation. Forget polite parliamentary disagreements. What transpired recently has the potential to make our founding fathers, and perhaps even some current provincial premiers, question the fundamental principles upon which Canada was built. At the heart of this unfolding drama is Senator Mark Gold, the government's representative in the Red Chamber. With an air of unshakable conviction, Gold declared that no province can unilaterally leave Confederation without the express permission of the Canadian Parliament. His statement, delivered with a confidence bordering on definitive, paints a picture of Canada as a kind of constitutional Hotel California. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never truly leave, at least not without Ottawa's gracious consent. The constitutional implications of such a pronouncement are so staggering that even the most stoic and polite of separatists across the country are likely muttering, "Sorry, but what?" The genesis of this explosive exchange was a seemingly innocuous Thursday in the Senate. Senator Paula Simons, known for her sharp intellect and incisive questioning, posed what many are now calling one of the most loaded questions in Canadian politics since the perennial query about the contents of other Trudeau cabinet documents. Simons inquired whether the Clarity Act, that pivotal piece of legislation originally conceived to prevent Quebec from an unfettered dash towards independence, also extends its reach to other provinces. Hypothesizing, of course. Definitely not because there are active separatist movements in Alberta, diligently collecting signatures for a referendum and reportedly expecting Premier Danielle Smith to fast-track a vote on separation. No, just a casual constitutional curiosity, a hypothetical musing on the intricacies of Canadian law. But it was Senator Gold's response that truly catapulted this polite inquiry into a constitutional earthquake. His answer was, to put it mildly, fascinating. And by fascinating, we mean constitutionally terrifying for those who believe in provincial autonomy. Gold asserted that the application of the Clarity Act is not a matter of belief, but of law. He unequivocally stated that the Act applies to all provinces, without exception. This declaration sent ripples through the political landscape, confirming the federal government's expansive interpretation of a law previously seen by many as primarily a Quebec-centric instrument. However, the plot thickened considerably when Senator Simons followed up with the most logical and pressing question: what steps would a province need to take to actually separate? At this crucial juncture, Senator Gold performed a parliamentary pirouette worthy of an Olympic gymnast. He dodged the question with an evasiveness that would make a seasoned politician blush, offering a non-answer along the lines of, "Well, if this were a classroom, that'd be a great question." And then, he simply refused to elaborate further. It was akin to asking your mechanic how to change a tire, only to be told, "That's a mechanical question," before they disappear into the sunset, leaving you stranded with a flat. This uncharacteristic reticence from a former law professor, especially on a matter of such profound national significance, has only served to deepen the mystery and amplify the concerns about the federal government's true intentions. To truly grasp the magnitude of this Senate exchange, we must first dissect the Clarity Act itself, a piece of legislation that, judging by some Senate representatives' responses, seems too complex to explain to the very people who elect them. The Act came into force in 2000, a direct response to Quebec's nail-bitingly close 1995 referendum on sovereignty. In that historic vote, separatists were defeated by a mere 55,000 votes out of nearly 5 million cast, a margin narrower than most Stanley Cup finals, and infinitely more consequential for the future of Confederation. The Clarity Act vests the House of Commons with the power to assess whether the question posed in a provincial referendum on secession is clear enough to genuinely represent the will of the population. In theory, this sounds like a reasonable safeguard against ambiguous or misleading questions that could manipulate public opinion. In practice, however, it means that federal politicians in Ottawa ultimately get to decide whether a province's desire to leave Confederation is phrased in a way they approve of. It's an arrangement that smacks of a profound conflict of interest, akin to handing your landlord a notice to move out, only to be told, "We'll let you know if your wording is acceptable." The inherent bias and potential for federal overreach couldn't be more glaring, unless it were adorned with a neon sign flashing "conflict of interest" and waving a miniature Canadian flag. Now, let's turn our attention to the particularly spicy developments unfolding in Alberta, which are undoubtedly the unspoken catalyst for Senator Simon's hypothetical questions. Recent amendments to Alberta's Citizen Initiative Act have dramatically lowered the threshold for triggering a provincial referendum. Previously, initiating a referendum required approximately 600,000 signatures. Now, that number has plummeted to a mere 177,000, roughly 3.5% of Alberta's population. This is not a typo. We have gone from needing a small city's worth of support to something closer to the population of a mid-sized Alberta community like Red Deer. It's like lowering the bar for a high jump competition to ankle height and then expressing surprise when a flood of participants suddenly start clearing it. This significantly reduced hurdle makes the prospect of a separation referendum in Alberta a far more tangible and immediate threat than ever before. Adding to the immediate urgency, the Alberta Prosperity Project, a prominent separatist organisation, already has a referendum question prepared and ready to go. It is short, blunt, and strikingly to the point. Do you agree the province shall become a sovereign country and cease to be a province of Canada? There is no carefully worded economic partnership language, no vague diplomatic phrasing reminiscent of Quebec's 1995 referendum. This is a straightforward, "Do you want out?" kind of question. It is the constitutional equivalent of ripping off a band-aid, except the band-aid is Confederation, and the wound underneath is 157 years of simmering federal-provincial tension, particularly acute in Western Canada. This is where things become legally murky, and by murky, we mean potentially explosive. Senator Gould's unwavering insistence that Parliament must approve any attempt at secession stands in stark contrast to his complete inability or unwillingness to clarify how such an approval would be enforced. What exactly happens if Alberta proceeds with a referendum, votes decisively in favour of secession, and Ottawa subsequently says no? Do we send in the RCMP, cancel federal transfer payments, block their access to Tim Hortons? Okay, that last one might be pushing it, but the point stands. The enforcement mechanism is utterly unclear, as transparent as a foggy prairie morning in January. This ambiguity is not just concerning. It's a dangerous void in the very heart of the federal government's constitutional stance. The legal precedent for such a scenario is virtually non-existent, adding another layer of complexity to this already tangled web. The Supreme Court of Canada, in its landmark 1998 ruling on Quebec's secession, stated that Quebec could not unilaterally secede. However, critically, the court also ruled that if there was a clear majority voting yes on a clear question, the rest of Canada would then have a constitutional obligation to negotiate. In quintessential Canadian fashion, the court essentially delivered a verdict that translated to, "You can't just leave, but if you really, really want to, we have to sit down and talk about it." It was a firm but polite legal decree, a binding version of, "Let's talk this through over double-doubles and donuts." However, Alberta's case presents a distinct set of challenges compared to Quebec's. Quebec's historical claims to distinctiveness were underpinned by a unique language, culture, and civil law system. Alberta's separation argument is primarily political and economic, rooted in grievances over federal energy policies, fiscal transfers, and perceived alienation. These differences could raise very different legal and practical challenges, potentially rendering the Quebec precedent less directly applicable and demanding new constitutional interpretations. What is truly intriguing, and indeed deeply unsettling, is Senator Gould's refusal to elaborate on the mechanisms of enforcement. By effectively saying, "Trust us, we'll figure it out if and when it happens," he is offering no reassuring constitutional clarity, especially for someone with his legal background. This lack of transparency from the government's representative in the Senate on such a monumental issue only fuels apprehension and uncertainty across the country. The broader implications of this Senate exchange extend far beyond Alberta's borders. If the federal government's steadfast position is that no province can leave Confederation under any circumstances without Parliament's explicit blessing, it fundamentally alters the very meaning of Confederation. It transforms Canada from what was once understood as a voluntary union of provinces into something more akin to a constitutional trap. A structure where check-in was mandatory, but check-out is decidedly not an option without the bouncer's permission. This entire debate also starkly highlights the strange contradictions inherent in Canadian federalism. Provincial governments ostensibly possess the power to hold referendums on matters of provincial jurisdiction. However, it now appears that those referendums only carry weight and legitimacy if Ottawa approves of both the question posed and the eventual outcome.